Welcome to the Casey Zavaleta podcast. This podcast is for those who are in pursuit of high performance and for those who are interested in living with intentionality. We'll explore the practices, habits, and mindsets that will help you to be better in your personal life and in your professional life. Your time and attention is a gift that I promise not to take for granted. Thank you for being here. Today, I want to talk about the top 10 presentation mistakes that I see people making most often. Now, when you hear that, you might think, but Casey, I'm not a presenter. I'm not a speaker. I beg to differ. When I think of presenting, when I think of speaking, I think of this spectrum, right? You might immediately think of someone who's keynoting or even someone who's speaking at conferences or speaking in sort of these structured settings on a stage with a podium. That's great. If that's you, then you're definitely going to get a lot of value out of this podcast. But all the way on the other end of the spectrum is the most casual version of presenting, which I think we don't think about seriously enough. What I mean by this is the time when you have a project that you're going to present to the rest of your team on a meeting. The time when you're presenting a new idea, making a pitch to your boss. There are so many different scenarios. Maybe you're a coach, maybe you're a trainer. Every single time that you teach a class, you are presenting. So really, these are just speaking and communication skills when you have something specific that you are talking about or presenting on. And I see these 10 mistakes happening all the time. So I'm excited to talk through them with you. I think that if we onboard these can up-level the communication that we have in business meetings. Like I said, if you're a coach or a trainer in the gym, even just conversations that you're having with your spouse, all the way up to, I think this is going to make you a better presenter when you have to get on a stage and formally present. Okay, so let's get into them. Number one mistake that I see people making, you're winging it. You're not preparing. It's the funniest thing. It's kind of like how people default to viewing others when they're really successful as an overnight success, right? Because you didn't see all of the things that happened beneath the iceberg to make that person seem instantly successful. Speaking and presenting is the same. It looks like if someone is well rehearsed and they're prepared and they know what they're going to speak to, they get on that stage and it looks like they're just ad-libbing. It comes so naturally to them. Now, there might be the few anomalies where that is the case, but 98% of the time, that person is not winging it. It's hours of preparation that went into making a polished presentation or performance. Now, depending on the speaking that you're doing, preparation and not winging it can look like a lot of different things. If it's just a meeting that we're talking about, taking 3 minutes before the meeting to center yourself and get really clear about what it is that you're trying to say and the take-home message that you want people to walk away with can make a world of difference. Please, every time you go into a meeting, I hope that that's a practice and that's a habit that you're doing to prepare. Now, on the scale of, you have something formal where you have an audience that's coming to listen to you speak, the level of preparation should be months of preparation. And there are some different stages to that. It includes ideation, brainstorming, and really getting down to the core of your key messaging. This is a theme that's going to come up later in our top 10 mistakes, so I don't want to give it away too soon. But it looks like spending the time to get clear about the idea, get clear about the pieces of content that you want to include, get clear about anything that you need to support you. And then it's really structuring out that content, even if you're not working with a formal script that you're going to attempt to memorize, although many people do that. Even if it's not a formal script that's memorized and that you're attempting to do word for word. It's sort of these really structured content blocks. And maybe we'll do another episode of the podcast if you all are interested, let me know, on how to organize content and think about things in terms of content blocks whenever you're doing a presentation. As a quick side note on this one, so you might be thinking, great, I won't wing it. I'm going to type out exactly what I want to say, and then I'm going to put it up on my screen and I'm going to read it. Please don't do that. This is one of my least favorite ways to hear people present. And although I do appreciate the preparation and the thoughtfulness that goes into writing out the script and being diligent about what you want to say, the problem when people start reading a script is that they go into robot mode. For whatever reason, because they're reading off of the page, all of a sudden they're not engaged with the ideas. It's not coming out of that present moment. It's coming from a moment that you had previously, and you're trying to sort of like insert yourself back there, and it never works as well. Like, you can always tell when someone is just reading from a screen. Quick little story on this. There's someone that I worked with in the past who is one of my favorite presenters and who I learned so much from in watching him speak and present. And he had a virtual engagement that he was really excited about, and I was there listening to. And he's, like I said, one of my favorite speakers. And he really wanted to nail his intro. The introduction can be a challenging part of a talk because you're not in the groove yet, right? You might have a little bit of nerves. You really want to set yourself up well. So he really wanted to nail the intro. And I think he was working through it. And finally he decided, screw it. I'm just going to I'm going to write it out and I'm going to read off of the screen. And I didn't know that he was going to do this. I was just listening in. When he did it, my heart sank. It was so obvious. All of a sudden, all of those things that made him charismatic and engaging and of the moment, and that I really looked up to in him as a speaker, were completely gone because he became a robot, and all of a sudden he wasn't in that present moment. So I encourage you not to use a script. I love bullet points. I love structuring it out. I love talking through it multiple times beforehand, like sort of rehearsing and getting used to saying the words and kind of how you want to phrase things. But ideally, it is coming from in that specific moment. Okay, so number one presentation mistake that I see people making is they are winging it. They are not prepared. Okay, mistake number two that I see people making is they think that the slides are the presentation. They're equating the slides being done with the presentation being done. Please know that when people are listening to you speak, they want to be paying more attention to you than they want to be reading text off of a slide. Yet we think the opposite oftentimes. We think that people want all the information as if they're going to absorb everything from the slide, and then we are just there as the accessory. The reverse is true. So you should be able to do whatever presentation or pitch that you're preparing for. You should be able to do it with zero materials. Now, I'm a big fan of graphics and pictures and branding that adds to what you're doing and what you're presenting. But everyone that's listening to you speak should be able to walk away with the main idea, with their key takeaways, with their next action steps, without having to see anything on a slide. That's how you know what you're saying is strong enough. Again, the slides are the addition, the accessory. And just a couple other quick notes on slides. I could go on about this for a whole nother episode also. Maybe all of these 10 is going to become 10 different episodes. We will see. But another quick thing on this, less is more on slides. Again, no one's brain can really like fully listen to you talking and absorb what you're saying and read words off of the slide at the same time. Like, that doesn't enhance anything. It really just muddies the waters. And if you put so much on the screen that people don't feel like they could absorb what was on there because they're listening to you talk, and then you flip to the next slide, they're going to get this sense, did I miss something? What was on there? What was I supposed to have read? It just becomes a lot for the listener. Tell me this. When was the last time that you sat in a presentation or an educational session and you thought, wow, that slide, that paragraph that was on that slide was super impactful? Probably never. You thought, wow, that one thing that person said, that line that they said was super impactful. So remember, you are the main event. Your slides are not the main event. And this absolutely still applies in business settings. Spoken words have this power that written words don't. Written words I see as being more nuanced and more finessed, and they can become maybe more intricate. They can provide more detail. All of those are great things, but spoken words, when done with simplicity and clarity, can be so powerful. So don't forget that when you're preparing for your presentation. The slides are not your presentation. Number 3, the third presentation mistake that I see a lot of people making is they've overcomplicated their message. Or said another way, maybe they're not clear about what the main message is of their talk. You should be able to say your main idea in one simple sentence. That's not one run-on sentence that could be a paragraph. That's boom, one simple sentence. For example, use fitness to change your life, not your body. That's a main idea of a talk that I give. It's simple, it's direct, and it's clear. And every single piece of content that's in that talk supports that main idea. You don't want to have 3 main ideas. You don't want to have not even really identified your main idea and just kind of have some stories that circulate around a topic or a theme. Like, state it loud and clear. And every time that you add something in to your presentation or your pitch, whatever it is, every time you add in a piece of content, your filter is, does that support my main idea? Does that support the main thing that I want people to understand as truth when they walk away from this talk? Your main idea is probably a lot simpler than you think. People love to overthink this one, but short and simple. The next mistake that I see people making is they haven't taken the time to deeply consider and understand their audience that they're speaking to. It's really common when we are creating and developing something that we think about ourselves and what we want to say. How is it going to come across when I present this content, when I give this information? And that's done from your world. That's done based on the beliefs that you have, the stories that you know, the environment that you are used to, sort of within your worldview. It's very often that a talk doesn't land as well as it should because the speaker didn't consider that perhaps the audience has a bit different of a perspective or a worldview than you do. So some important questions to ask yourself as you're preparing to speak to a certain group. What is their world like? And I suggest that you take some time to deeply reflect on this. What are the challenges that they are facing? What are the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis? What are their fears? What are the things that bring them the most stress? How do they tend to communicate? How do they talk? What mediums do they use to communicate? How do they learn? Maybe this is a really academic setting and you're speaking to a group of people that are used to being in an academic setting where they read and they are able to absorb detailed and technical information. Well, that's going to be one style of talking. You're going to, present to them in one certain way. Maybe you're speaking to a group of people who is very hands-on in the work that they do, and they're out in the community talking to people, or they have a job where they're on their feet all the time, right? They're not used to being in like a classroom academic setting. You're going to speak to those people very differently because they learn differently. They need to absorb information differently. I also encourage you to consider how the people that you're speaking to are different from you. In order for a message to land, you don't have to talk to people who are the exact same as you, but understanding your differences and not pretending like they're not there is an important piece. It kind of goes without saying that this point, number 4, requires empathy. It requires you to be able to have the skill that is putting yourself into someone else's shoes and being able to sort of picture what the world looks like to somebody else, to someone who lives a life that's different than yours. If it's not a practice that you're used to doing, I encourage you to start doing it deliberately. So next time you're preparing to speak to a group of people, again, even if it's in a meeting, it could be the most casual thing ever. Maybe it's just in a social setting. I want you to really try to deeply consider the person that you are speaking to. Can you speak to their problems and their challenges? It also takes a lot of the pressure off as a speaker to think this way. When you're in your own head and thinking about how you're going to come off and what's important to you and, the most important messages that you could say, there's a lot of pressure there, and it often leads to a little bit of self-consciousnness. But when you insert yourself into the other, and now it's bigger than you and outside of yourself, it tends to take a lot of the pressure off of the speaker. Okay, let's quickly review because we are flying through these. Top 10 mistakes. Number 1 was you're winging it. You're not prepared. Number 2 was you're mistaking your slides for being the presentation. Remember, you are the main event. The slides are the accessory. Number 3 is you're overcomplicating your message. You haven't identified your one core main idea. And then number 4 is you haven't deeply considered your audience. Number 5 is very similar. Number 5 is you haven't made it human. This is similar to the previous one, but a little bit different. Humans understand information and we absorb things when they're told to us in stories. We learn so much from hearing a story and there being a lesson embedded in it, as opposed to hearing someone just state the lesson to us. For example, let's come up with a random main idea that I might be using for a talk. Maybe I'm trying to make the point that animals can be healing. If I just say that to you, your brain processes it and you might say, oh yeah, that sounds like something that is true. I agree. You don't feel it on an emotional level. However, if I instead told you a story about a 5-year-old girl named Alexis, who, this is all made up by the way, a 5-year-old girl named Alexis who has a terminal illness, and she was visited by this puppy in the hospital. And I told you about the difference in her demeanor when she was, stuck in the hospital, stuck in a bed, not feeling well, undergoing treatment. And then when she was able to engage with this puppy, that lit up her day. And she formed this relationship over time with the dog. And then she ended up getting better. And she finally adopted the dog after she was cured of her illness, for example. Which one makes you feel something more? Right? Is it just me saying it? Animals can be healing. Or is it me telling you about the humanity of the difference that an animal can make, especially in a child's life, right? We feel it differently. I want you to think about it this way. You have to feel differently to start to think differently. And you have to think differently to start to act differently. If what we're looking for from people is action and change, we have to tap into that feeling and that emotional side. So try to remember the humanity of it, even if it's a pitch. How is the project or the business that you're in, how does that impact the customer at the end of the day? How does their life change? What's the story behind it? That's what people relate to. And often the talks that we give can be devoid of that. I know for me as a speaker, it's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm not really a natural storyteller. So I have to really think through the good stories that help to show the points that I'm trying to make. Okay, so number 5 was you didn't make it human by inserting some sort of story into the talk. The next most common mistake that people make when presenting is there wasn't a clear call to action. What do you want people to do when they walk away from your talk? My marketers understand this better than anyone. We know that on any marketing material, the most important piece is the call to action. All of the copy and the graphics and the branding and the logo are good, but they don't serve a purpose unless they stimulate the action that you want someone to take. And we don't want to leave it implicit what action someone should take. We want to be incredibly explicit and say, when you walk away from this, here's the next thing that needs to happen, or here are the next things that need to happen. Coming back to our simplicity piece, the more simple and clear the call to action is, the more likely someone is to take action. I spent a couple of years teaching people how to improve their habits in any area of their life, but specifically in health and wellness. And when I did that, what I found is that people have a lot of resistance to taking action, especially if it's new. If it's not something that's already automated in our lives, it is quite a lift to get people to do something. My coaches and trainers definitely understand this. So the simpler that we can make it, the smaller and the simpler that we can make it, the better. For example, let's say that you are giving a talk around improving your sleep, and you want people to start to implement some sort of nighttime wind down routine and have an earlier bedtime to improve their sleep. You might feel like it's implicit in all of the fantastic information that you're giving that someone should start to scooch up their bedtime and turn off their phones an hour before bed because you've given them all of these stats and this good data, and maybe you've even put some stories in there to make it human. But most of those people, I would venture to say 95% of those people are going to walk away from the talk and they're not going to do anything. So let's reduce the resistance. Let's reduce the barrier down as much as possible. So you might say to people, walking away from this talk, in the next week, I want you to try to get to bed 15 minutes earlier each night. Whatever time that is for you, try to be in bed, lights out, 15 minutes earlier. And then you ask people for a commitment. Who feels like they could commit to that and who feels like that's going to make a difference in their lives? Getting people to engage in that way and laying out something that's so clear and simple is going to lead to the greatest uptake and success. Now, still, you're going to be lucky if 50% of the people there actually do it, but it's going to be a heck of a lot higher of a proportion than if you didn't have a very clear call to action. This is something that irks me a little bit about a lot of the motivational speakers that I hear. I love a good inspirational talk, talking about optimizing our performance and going into things with energy and fervor. I love those types of talks, but often there's a lot of energy that we create and stimulate in the room, but it doesn't necessarily translate into anything because people don't know what they need to do next to get better. So laying that out very clearly for people, I think, is a very important aspect of any talk that you give. Okay, we're on to number 7. Number 7 is a personal favorite of mine, and this is that you're not pausing enough. People understand information in the pause. So their brain takes in all these words as you're talking, and then it's only when you give them a breather that they synthesize it into something that means something to them. If it is a constant onslaught of words, it's very natural. People's brains just can't quite keep up, and they're not getting as much as they could out of your talk. Now, this is something that must be practiced because when we talk in real time as the words come out, we understand what we're saying. We understand what we're trying to say. As a speaker, we don't need the pauses as much. So this is a skill that we need to practice because I guarantee those that are listening, they do need the pauses, okay? It also makes you, like, whether you're nervous or not, you may be nervous. Even if you're not leaving the pauses to breathe, allow people to absorb, it makes you come off as nervous and inexperienced. It's those that can command a long pause that are often the most impactful and that come across as the most confident. And when I say they're the most impactful, like, those are the people where when you walk away from their talk, everyone can say the main idea back because it was clear, their brain had time to absorb it, and they probably repeated that main idea a decent amount of times throughout their talk as well. So number 7, you're not pausing enough. This one takes practice. It may not come naturally to you. Record yourself back. If you're giving a talk in a meeting, you can record it. If you're doing a pitch, you can record it. If you're going to be on stage or giving a talk, set up a phone while you're rehearsing and watch yourself do it, and make sure that you have those true pauses. And when I say a pause, it's not like a split second. It's not the pause that you hear between this word and this word. What I mean is the pause that you hear between this word and this word. That was a pause. Okay? And it's very impactful when we find that cadence. Okay, let's do another review. Number 1, presentation mistake. You're winging it. Number 2, you think that your slides are the presentation. Number 3, you're overcomplicating the message. Number 4, you haven't deeply considered your audience and their world. Number 5, you didn't make it human by using story. Number 6, you haven't identified the call to action. And number 7 was you're not pausing enough. Last couple for you here. Number 8 is you didn't have a conversation with your audience. Things that are one-sided are boring. People start to tune out, especially if they're over, 15 minutes. Who wants to listen to a monologue that's greater than 15 minutes? So find ways to engage your audience, even if it's just in their head. Okay, so again, this comes back to like our spectrum of speaking. If it's in a meeting, actually have a conversation with people and take the time, take the breaks from your prepared content to get their feedback, get their thoughts. And that's not just saying, does that make sense? And them saying yes. I mean, ask them something that requires them to think. Where do you feel like this applies to your business? Where do you feel like this applies to the clients that you're working with? Is there anything here that you feel like could be a barrier for adoption for you? Again, these are sort of more like business specific situations. It could be asking in a classroom setting. It could be asking a couple of quick review questions on the main idea for that section. Who can tell me what the main idea was? Getting that audience engagement and interaction just naturally helps them to absorb the message easier. Unless you're doing a keynote with lighting and graphics, or you're giving a TEDx talk where, even those aren't very long, but where it's this very curated sort of talk that you're giving and there's tons of diversity in the content. Unless it's that situation, get interaction from the audience, especially in the virtual world, where it's so easy for our brains to go offline and tune out and us to, see the notification that comes on our phone and pop over to it. Have the conversation to keep people engaged. Number 9 doesn't actually relate to the virtual environment. This one's much more specific to a live environment. Whether you're, facilitating an event, or you're standing up at a podium, or you are on stage, whatever, in a classroom, anything. Number 9 is you're moving around too much. Again, this is something that we do when we haven't practiced the opposite. When we haven't practiced just standing and feeling grounded and rooted through the floor, the default is to pace back and forth, right? We've all seen the speaker that's like pacing from one side of the stage to the other. The energy that gives off is not confident in the message, insecure, and restless. If you want to deliver an idea that is going to land with people and they're really going to have the best chance at deeply engaging with that idea, your feet should not move. No like tap dancing under your body. Your feet should not move. You should stand and land and deliver that line. There's a pause before, there's a pause after. You've made sure to emphasize the right words. Again, I don't know why it's a default for people. It's kind of like the slides one, where people think that walking back and forth makes them appear comfortable and more casual, but in reality, it does the opposite. Watch the most experienced speakers, besides comedians, because that's sort of like a different craft and they tend to move around a lot more. So like putting comedians aside, watch anyone else that's a very skilled speaker. They're moving around intentionally, but they're not pacing. So the best thing and sort of the lowest hanging fruit that you can do is just practice your stand and land. Feel grounded through the floor, and that'll help you feel grounded through your ideas. So number 9 was we're moving around less. The final of the top 10 presentation mistakes that I want to give you today is you put your Q&A at the end. This is another one that is so common that I don't really think people even consider that there could be an alternative. Obviously, there's time for Q&A at the end, right? This goes back to a couple of the other points that we've made. Engaging with the audience and making it human includes having that conversation throughout. When we do Q&A at the end, the quality of first of all, the questions tend to be all over the place, right? You've just given this whole talk. What if someone had a question about something that related to something at the very beginning of your talk? It's almost like that moment has passed, right? Giving people chances in between sections to ask questions often makes the questions much more tailored to that conversation that you're currently having with the audience, as opposed to everything just like piled at the end and all over the place. The other thing that putting Q&A at the end does is it gives away the end of your presentation to those that don't know your topic as well as you do, right? So when people ask questions, they're often directing the conversation to something that's really specific to them. Most people just ask a question because they have a problem and they want you to help them solve it. That's great. And I'm a fan of that and that one-on-one engagement. But when you do it all at the end, all of a sudden, those main ideas that you delivered so clearly and so directly, they're not the final thing that people hear anymore. Now, the final thing that people hear is, my Aunt Susie has this specific problem and you talked about this. What do you think would be good for her to do next week? It's like, good. I'm glad you're engaging with the content, but probably not like the main thing that we want to leave everybody with. And this one's so default that even in the industry, like at most conferences, at breakouts, at keynotes, maybe less at keynotes, but people ask, can you do Q&A at the end? I highly, highly recommend that instead of pushing it all to the end, you take that Q&A and you break it up into little sections throughout, and then you take the last 5 minutes to own those final talking points and really drive home your call to action in that final section. Okay, so final one is you're just throwing your Q&A at the end to use up all the extra time you have. It's not as thoughtful as it could be. Okay, let's do a rapid fire review. Top 10 mistakes that you're making in presentations. Number 1, you're winging it. Number 2, you think your slides are the presentation. Number 3, you're overcomplicating the message. Number 4 is you haven't deeply considered your audience and their point of view. Number 5, you didn't make it human by using story. Number 6, you haven't identified the call to action. Number 7 is you're not pausing enough. Number 8 is you didn't have a conversation with the audience and make it engaging and interactive. Number 9 is you're moving around too much. You're pacing. Number 10, you put your Q&A at the end. Okay, everyone? I hope that's helpful. We all have to talk in our professional lives and in our personal lives, and our ability to clearly communicate the ideas that we want to others is just going to up-level everything that we do. Okay? Shoot me a message and let me know what you liked from this, if there's anything that you'd like me to do a more complete episode on, and I will look forward to speaking with everyone next time. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Casey Zavaleta podcast. If you are organizing an event that's oriented around health and wellness, or you're booking corporate wellness sessions for your company, and you're interested in having me come and speak at that event, please reach out at caseyzavaleta.com/contact. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, I would hugely appreciate if you could take 10 seconds and leave a 5-star rating on the show. I would even more hugely appreciate if you could take 30 seconds and leave a quick review on the show. It helps to spread the word to more listeners about the podcast. If you would like to receive notifications about episode drops, or if you're interested in actionable insights related to podcast content, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter. You can do that at caseyzavaleta.com/subscribe. Okay, everyone. That's it from me this week. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you back next Wednesday for the next episode of the show.